Welcome to Ferrin Contemporary's online programs featuring artists and curators in conversation about the work they do together. In my job as gallerist on a project that takes several years to develop and produce, like Raid the Icebox, it is through conversations that begin long before the exhibition opens. Through multiple in-person and virtual meetings, the artists are inspired, guided, and funded to produce new works. I am lucky in that I too learn along the way as a fly on the wall, but the term that describes the role I play is more like the leader of a hot air balloon chase crew, the ground team that follows the balloon in flight and assists the pilot in launch, landing, deflation, and pack up. Today, you get to ride along and see and hear what I enjoyed in 2019 on the chase crew of Raid the Icebox. I'd like to introduce Sarah Margolis-Pineo, who will guide us through today's program. Sarah joined Ferrin Contemporary team this January. As an experienced curator and educator specializing in contemporary craft and design, Sarah has been working with Paul Scott on new American scenery projects and artists who source historic material in their artistic practice. Here you go, Sarah.
Thank you, Leslie, and thanks to the presenters who are here today, and hello to everyone out there who's joined us for this conversation about Raid the Icebox now on view at RISD. As Leslie mentioned, my name is Sarah, and I am thrilled to be introducing our exceptional panel this afternoon. But first, as always, a few notes. We are recording, as you noticed when you logged in, so please keep yourselves muted during the program. There will be time for Q&A at the end. You can enter your questions into the chat. And when you type, we would really appreciate it if you send your questions directly to us, Ferrin Contemporary, just so that you don't have those pop-ups on the bottom of everyone's screen as they're presenting. And as our program progresses today, our presenters will mention some really fantastic online projects. So following the talks, I'll send links to everyone via the chat, as well as include them in an email in the next couple of days following the program that also has the link to the online recording. And if you have questions about anything unrelated to this, please send it to us at Ferrin Contemporary anytime. And so with the housekeeping out of the way, our format today is as follows. Each panelist will give a short presentation with visuals, and following all three presentations, there will be sort of a collective dialogue about collaborating at RISD as well as beyond. And first up in our lineup this afternoon is Elizabeth Williams, David and Peggy Rockefeller, Curator of Decorative Arts and Design at RISD Museum. She'll give an overview of the Raid the Icebox Now project, both the exhibition as well as the digital publication. And following all three short presentations, Elizabeth will also moderate conversation at the end. Second, Brooklyn-based artist Beth Katleman, who is known for her porcelain installations and sculptures that combine Rococo ornament with icons of popular culture. Her installation at RISD Museum, Gains of Chance, is on view through July 4 of this year, so please go see it in the next couple weeks. Third, UK-based artist Paul Scott, who is known for research into printed vitreous surfaces, as well as his characteristic blue and white artworks in glazed ceramic. His installation at RISD, New American Scenery, is on view through December 31. And so with that, I will turn it over to Beth. Oh, excuse me, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Sarah and Leslie, for organizing this program today, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I am going to briefly share a little bit about the Raid the Icebox project to give our discussion some background and context, as well as how the projects developed with Beth and Paul from the museum side, and then they can tell you what really happened and their side of the story, so to speak. So in 2018, the RISD Museum invited 8 artists to conduct object-based research and to create new bodies of work, and to use the museum as a site for critical and creative production. And you see the 8 artists listed here, including Beth and Paul. Their work was then displayed in 8 different locations throughout the museum, and each exhibition opened one at a time from 2019 to 2020. And of course, we had the pandemic pause, and I am very pleased to say that the RISD Museum is reopening to the public on June 13th, as Sarah mentioned, and Paul's exhibition will be on view until December 30th, and Beth's exhibition will be on until July 4th. So please come visit us. So what is Raid the Icebox now? It is a 50-year anniversary celebration of Andy Warhol's Raid the Icebox exhibition that occurred from 1969 to 1970 at the RISD Museum. It is arguably the first artist-curated museum exhibition, and it came about in a rather serendipitous way. John and Dominique DeMille, you see Dominique here on the right. They are the founders of the Menil Collection in Houston, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, were visiting RISD, and they were touring the storage facilities at the museum with then director Frank Robinson. And they were very surprised to see how many pieces of art were in the storage area. I can assure you nothing's changed. We have more in the storage area now, of course. But they had this idea that they suggested to Frank Robinson and said, why don't you have a contemporary artist come into the storage area and select things and put them on view in the museum, throughout the museum, in a really unconventional and innovative way? Well, who better to ask to do that than Andy Warhol, who you also see in this image. Fortunately, when asked, he agreed and said yes. And you see him here in the museum's painting and sculpture storage area getting ready to raid our collections. And here's what happened. On the left, you can see apparently in 1969 what an area of storage looked like. And you can see that he kind of took this group of objects and put them together in the galleries, which is what you see on the right, in that same kind of jumbled random way that you would find objects in storage. In fact, on the left, you can even see a screen that would be used in storage to hang the paintings. And here you see on the left furniture storage. This is the second story of furniture storage, which mostly houses chairs, and it's affectionately called Chair Heaven. On the right, you can see how Warhol took that same idea and installed it in a museum gallery. And then finally, he was fascinated by the shoe and umbrella collection in the costume and textiles department and included that. And Warhol's approach was very much a combination of high-low art. He didn't necessarily pick the objects that were typically viewed as being high value or the best pieces in the collection. And of course, he's putting out a large quantity of items, certainly more than we curators typically get away with today. And so from the original version, into the Raid the Icebox. Now, we invited the artists, including Beth and Paul, to come raid the museum in the 21st century. And whether that was incorporating historical objects alongside contemporary work created by the artist, as Paul did, or transforming a historical place in the museum with a contemporary intervention, as Beth did. So, Paul visited the museum and it was so surprising. He was really interested in our transferware collection. Imagine that. So he took a look at our transferware. Here is a view in storage, and you can see we have a lot of transferware in our collection. The space in which Paul began to imagine his exhibition is the Lucy Truman Aldrich Porcelain Gallery, which you see here, and you will see that it too ends up being transformed. And then he visited us at the museum, took a really close look at the collection. And for me as a curator who looks at medieval to present day pieces of art, the opportunity to have a contemporary artist looking at a historical collection in the museum is really exciting, especially one that hasn't really gotten that much attention in past years. And then Paul went about touring America to find out more about what those views depicted on the transfer look like now. And he, of course, will tell you more about that. He went back to his studio and began to design and work on the project, as well as create a new body of work. And then we got to visit the artist in their studios. For Paul, that was his studio away from home at Ferrin Contemporary in Cummington, Massachusetts. And you see myself as well as Emily Banas. She is the assistant curator of decorative arts at the museum. So we visited Paul after he was basically finished firing all his pieces and got to take a sneak peek at what he would be bringing for installation. And then we got to install the pieces here. You see a happy, smiling Paul here after we installed the cases, looking good. And here I show you the final result of the exhibition installed in the porcelain gallery. Now, at the same time I was working with Paul, I had the pleasure of working with Beth as well on her exhibition, Games of Chance. And Beth focused on Pendleton House, which you see here in the upper left. This is a purpose-built wing for the display of American art, the first that was American decorative art specifically, the first in the country. You see Charles Pendleton in one of two images known of him on the right. And then you see a piece of furniture from the Pendleton collection, which he gave to the museum. Beth worked in this hall in part of Pendleton House, and in a moment you will see how she absolutely transformed this space into an immersive experience. And she also took a really deep dive into researching not only the history of Pendleton House, but also Charles Pendleton, the man himself. And after doing this research, she set about making over 10,000 pieces of porcelain that would tell the story, both real and imagined, of Pendleton and Pendleton House. And she also took a really hard look at how museum donors are venerated at museums, and questioning whether those donors should be venerated at museums. We also had the opportunity to visit Beth in her studio in Brooklyn and do a little bit of filming, which you see here. And our installation crew was very thankful because Beth is incredibly organized and detail-oriented, and as all these thousands of pieces of porcelain were made, she also was laying them out, sharing these plans with our installers, so we had an idea of what would be going on when they arrived. And here you see Beth installing. First images of the pieces were set up to kind of get a general layout. And you may be able to see a really excited group of school children getting a sneak peek of the installation behind her there. And then she and Michelle Nguyen, you see up on the scaffolding, went about working with our installation crew, installing all of the pieces. And here is the final result. From both of these exhibitions, the museum acquired pieces of work, and from Beth's exhibition, we acquired the shipwreck mirror, where you can see that on the left here. And we actually acquired two works from Paul, one of which you see here, the uranium series. So we're very pleased not only to have the exhibitions on, but bring permanently into the collection work from both of these artists. And I am going to stop sharing, and I am going to turn it over to Beth.
Okay, let's see if I can make this happen. Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to, let's see. Oh, I got to get my slideshow going. Hold on. To be here, and thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's just, this has been such a dream project for me, and I'm just thrilled to be able to talk to you about it today. So Charles Pendleton, here's the other image that we have of Charles Pendleton, handsome devil that he was. So he was a distinguished collector, but he also had a dark side, and that's what interested me most. And I asked Elizabeth early on if anything was off the table, and she just said no. So here we go. My project includes 3 elements: the Games of Chance room, which explores the inner life of Charles Pendleton; a film called The Pleasures of Ownership, which is a fake documentary in which 2 amateur historians take you on a tour of Games of Chance; and this very funky website, which supposedly belongs to those historians. So here's what we started with. And here's wonderful Michelle Wen, my studio manager. And she and I really lived and breathed Games of Chance for almost 2 years, making every object cast and handmade out of porcelain for this room. And as Elizabeth said, there are about 10,000 objects. Michelle made probably hundreds and hundreds of these gorgeous handmade flowers. And here's Bomi Kim making plaster molds for a giant baby and for some poker chips. And when you cast things in porcelain, they really transform into something otherworldly. And I'm going to just take you on a quick behind the scenes look at the room.
Every room tells a story, and I created this room to tell the story of a very peculiar man. The RISD Museum invited me to create an installation in Pendleton House, the wing that houses the decorative arts collection of Charles Pendleton. Pendleton himself was a bit of a mystery. Even his obituary said he was a man who lived strangely apart from his fellow men. And then it turns out that the 2 things that were known about him were that he got expelled from Yale for an indiscretion with a young lady, and that he was an inveterate gambler. So I thought, well, that's enough for me to go on. I decided to invent a period room to tell the story of Pendleton's fall from grace. Since I'm an artist and not a historian, I felt free to embellish. The theme of the Games of Chance room is luck. And to show Pendleton's changing fortunes, there's a shipwreck on one side of the room and paradise on the other. I always start with my collection of toys and figurines. When I cast them in porcelain, they transform into different characters in my stories. For Games of Chance, I chose this Marilyn Monroe doll to play Lady Luck, and then I added a blindfold. I found this Colonel Sanders doll from KFC, and I thought he would be the perfect Charles Pendleton. The project also includes a short film called The Pleasures of Ownership. 2 self-proclaimed experts lead a tour of the Games of Chance room, dropping hints about Pendleton's scandals along the way. In the end, it's up to the viewer to decide what's fact and what's fiction.
So we don't know exactly what Pendleton's indiscretion was at Yale, but suffice it to say that to get a well-born white man kicked out of Yale his freshman year, it must have been very, very serious. So later, Pendleton donated his decorative arts collection to the museum on the condition that the museum build a replica of his house in which to display it, which they did at great expense. But since Pendleton was a gambler, his fortunes really waxed and waned, and he didn't actually own this house. He was renting it. So Pendleton House isn't a real house, and it wasn't even his house. So, and then in the end, after he died, the museum actually had to sell off part of his collection in order to pay off his debts. So in exchange for a prized collection, the museum lent credibility to a man with an image problem. And I decided to look at the other side of him. So Lady Luck, or for the goddess Fortuna, is the perfect muse for the Games of Chance room because of Pendleton's changing fortunes. And in mythology, she's shown with paradise on one side of her and a shipwreck on the other. So the shipwreck side is all the decorations are made out of skulls and bones. And I don't know how many hundreds of skulls and bones we cast, but they're all, of course, in porcelain. And when you walk under this doorway, you feel like all of these objects are just cascading down on you. And this is the shipwreck mirror, which the museum acquired. And if you start at the top, you can see Fortuna surrounded by skeleton hands and a little shipwreck. And then moving clockwise, there's a sailboat, and I added the Yale crest to it. And then at the bottom, there's this very saucy mermaid, and she's offering her treasures to a young Pendleton dressed as a sailor. And just as he reaches for her, this avenging angel comes after him with a sword, and you can see the wreckage that follows. And here's Pendleton at the very top, chained to the mast, just trying to resist temptation. So I'm going to let our historians in the film take you through the Paradise side. But just so you know, they're very protective of Charles Pendleton. And so if things come up that are a little bit unflattering, they tend to gloss over them.
Let's have a look at this sumptuous mirror. Beneath the flower garlands and the cherubs with their cornucopias of fruit, we can see mythic creatures engaging in various amusements. A harem girl entertains a charming but unusually large caterpillar. And Pendleton, shown here as a snake in the garden, is about to surprise a young forest nymph.
Charles Pendleton appears again at the bottom. This time as Bacchus. And if you come in very close, you can just make out the figure of a tiny wood spirit in the gazebo. She appears to be sleeping.
Yep. Okay. This was my first film, and I was so fortunate to have this amazing team of professionals from the museum and two incredible actors to work with. It was a true collaboration in every sense of the word. And so the premise of the film is that Games of Chance is a long lost room that Pendleton himself had commissioned as his, quote, private pleasure pavilion. And then after he died, the room was dismantled and stored away in some sealed room in the basement of the museum and only recently uncovered. So it starts out fairly reasonable and then gets more and more unhinged as you go through. So here they are going down this surreal stairway to nowhere that doesn't even exist in the museum. And they find this mechanical room, which houses all the boxes that supposedly held the Games of Chance room. And in the end, they have to come to terms with a side of Pendleton that in some ways they really wish they didn't know about. So after the film is done, I decided I wanted to take the fake origin story of the room one step further. So I asked the design department at the museum if they would create a wall label for the Games of Chance room that looked exactly like all the other labels in Pendleton House. And so they created this illustration of Fortuna and a diagram at the bottom. And I added the fake history of the room and its discovery. Now, once you actually enter the room and you see Colonel Sanders and you see Marilyn Monroe, you know that there's no way this room could be 100 years old. But there's something about the authority of the wall label and about the museum setting that just makes you want to believe it's true. So, but once you realize it's a fiction, you might begin to question some of the other narratives in the museum. So I'm going to invite you all to, after this is over, to check out the digital publication in the links and there you can see the complete film. And you can also pan around a virtual 360 of the room and zoom in on the details. And I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Beth. That's great. I'm going to talk you through something in my project. Let's see if I can share my screen. There we are. Yeah. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, so I was delighted to be able to intervene in the Lucy Truman Aldrich collection of porcelain figurines, because within the hierarchies of within ceramics, sort of transferware, which is what I work in, blue and white printed statuaries, is sort of way down in the hierarchy. So to usurp the porcelain was a very tasty thing to do. And as Elizabeth has explained, the RISD Museum has a wonderful collection of transferwares, which date from the early 19th, well into the 20th century. And they include this little quadruplet of objects, which are all to do with the landing of Roger Williams in 1636. One of the pleasures of working in a museum collection, of course, is the opportunity to handle historic objects. You'll see that this particular picture was made by Wedgwood and Sons. And I was intrigued to see that Andy Warhol also enjoyed handling the museum objects. This is apparently Andy Warhol holding the painting of the landing of Roger Williams, which was commissioned by some New York publishers in 1858. Here's the landing of Roger as a prince, which was which then spawned other prints. And I see that Andy Warhol included the painting in his Ray the Icebox exhibition. This is from the catalogue. And the print, the landing of Roger Williams, spawned other prints and other copies.
Paul, it appears that your screen isn't moving.
Oh,
You're
really?
still looking at the porcelain room before your intervention.
Hang on a minute. Well, no, let's
There you go.
Let's get rid of that. Let's try it again. Can you see it now?
That's the room.
No, it's not moving.
No.
Well, I'm sharing my screen and I'm moving. Sharing is paused. Bring my window to the front. Sorry about this.
There we go.
Yeah. Let's try. Is that better?
Yes.
Good. Sorry about that.
You want to go back a couple?
Okay. Lucy Truman, you got that? No.
It's not moving again.
Okay. I'm sorry about this.
Why don't you just leave it up like that?
Okay.
We lost you altogether.
Okay, let's try it again. Share screen. Okay, RISD. Share. Can you see now?
That's the first one.
Yes. The
Still
second one?
first. Nope, it's not. Leave the screen up and just go up and down on the left.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my whole screen then? Is that what it is?
Yes, but it's better than just seeing one picture.
It is, and I'm sorry. Does that work?
At the moment. Try
Good.
moving it. It's not
Is it
moving. No.
I'm sorry, people. We did rest. We did. We did practice this.
So if you just share your whole screen, I think we can move forward, and it just won't be ideal.
I'm sorry about this. Okay. Can you see this now?
Yep.
Good. Okay. I'm sorry about this. Yeah, so let's go back to, these are pieces from the collection. And they're all about the landing of Roger Williams. And one of the pleasures of working with a collection is handling the materials. And as you can see, Andy Warhol also handled the materials. This is him handling Alonso Chappell's The Landing of Roger Williams, an oil painting, which became The Prince, which was in a book about the history of America. And he used the painting in the original exhibition. And the print itself then spawned a series of other prints, including this one, which you could actually buy today from Alamo as a stock print. And it's very interesting that the history of America was told 300 years after the event. And yet this event is commemorated on the Wedgwood picture in the RISD collection. And interestingly, in the textile department, I think it was a textile department, I found this fan, which was produced for the promotion of the Roger Williams picture, because it was commissioned by Warren and Wood. And here's the fan. Here's the same image on a fan. And I love this idea that images are moving between different media. Another sort of image that was created in the mid-19th century about Europeans' first engagement with American Indians was this Penn's Treaty plate by Thomas Green of about 1840. Of course, all those supposedly happy events were taken over by events. And as we all know, the history of the treatment of American Indians has been a consistent problem for hundreds of years. And it continues to this day. This is an aerial view of the Keystone Pipeline spill in North Dakota recently. And so I decided to update the transferwares with a more accurate view of what is happening in the 21st century. And this is one of the pieces which juxtaposes an image of Leonard Peltier with a pipeline near Standing Rock, near Big Bend. It references this historic piece that's in the collection. Putting these cartouches of famous people on landscapes and on transferwares, it was a particular peculiarity of the Staffordshire potters, and they juxtapose very odd things together. I've updated another piece, and this is called The Souvenir of Shiprock, and it refers to the uranium scandal, which killed a generation of Navajo men in northern Arizona when they were employed to mine uranium for the United States nuclear program. And on the back of the plates, they tell the story about the front. The jug on the right is another Roger Williams jug, but this one was made by Buffalo Pottery in America. And the platter itself depicts Timothy Benally heading up from the mine road. Timothy was an old uranium miner that I'd met. There was a piece that really took my breath away when I saw it in the store, and it was this platter called Cape Coast Castle. At first, I thought it was such a beautiful thing, and then as I looked closer at the scene in the middle, in through the grotto, I became. There was a feeling of dread as I looked at it, and as I then began to research the object, I realised that it depicted the slave trade. And it was based upon this print. It was an aquatint. And the print is one of a series of 4 with the views of West African slave forts from the sea, after paintings by George Webster. And all of them were dedicated to the Duke of Clarence. And they were made as part of a propaganda campaign for the continuation of the slave trade. And I'm grateful to Joe Darn for her research in digging out the information about this. So here's a souvenir of Providence from the collection. And on it, I've superimposed the Cape Coast Castle onto the souvenir. And you may wonder why. But actually, when you do your research, you find that the American slave trade from 1727 to 1807 might better be called the Rhode Island slave trade, because throughout the 18th century, Rhode Island merchants controlled between 60 and 90% of the American trade in African slaves. Unfortunately, that legacy is still with us. In 1964, Andy Warhol created this painting and print, which was on show when I came to do my research. And in 1963, peaceful civil rights protesters in Birmingham, Alabama were attacked by the police with dogs and water hoses. Warhol's print, of course, was based on one of Charles Moore's iconic photographs of unarmed Black civil rights protesters. And so I did a merging of Enoch Woods and Andy Warhol on a platter. The form was made by Mara Superior and the images painted instead of printed. And the three pieces are juxtaposed together in the exhibition. Of course, sadly, the issues are still with us. And last year, after the murder of George Floyd, again, civil rights protesters were set upon by police, and this is a new piece which commemorates that event. Not all the work has such sinister undertones. This is the Castle Battery in New York by Enoch Woods. And I'm going to show you a picture which was published in a book called Pictures of New York on Dark Blue Staffordshire Pottery by a guy called Haynes Halsey. And he reproduced these wonderful pictures of transferwares to tell a particular version of American history. Anyway, here's a little battery cup plate in the RISD Museum collection. And here's a fragment of an old Enoch Woods platter that I was able to acquire. And I wanted to give it a new life, to bring it back to life because it was broken. And because I do think, in spite of some of the problematic natures of these objects, that they're actually very beautiful things. And so I've inset them into a series of pearlware platters using kintsugi to highlight the insert. And they're in the museum in a case here. Finally, I'm going to stop now. One of the things I did was I updated particular scenes on transferwares with views from the 21st century. This was in the RISD Museum collection, and it's part of a series of plates which were pictures of New York based on engravings. This is New York Heights from Brooklyn, and this is the plate that was made from it by Stevenson from Cobridge in the early 19th century. And I asked Beth if she would take some pics across the river for me because she lives in Brooklyn. And then I produced a version for the 21st century. There we are. Thank you. And I'm sorry about the technical issues. I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Paul. I am just going to briefly share my screen again and go to the digital publication. Beth shared a little bit of hers, and I would also like to there we go, share Paul's as well. So this is on our website, and as Sarah said, she either has or will share the link to both of these. So looking at Paul's, Oh, I can do that from there. Okay, so this is what you will encounter for Paul's digital publication. And, you know, this was kind of an organic sort of thing that happened. We had not originally planned on digital publications, but the artist really drove this process and created almost really a second body of work with this. And so in Paul's digital publication, you will see a lot of information about the pieces, and as well as process and how things are made. And they will be juxtaposed with some of the historical pieces that are in our collection, as well as some video clips in talking with Paul about the exhibition. And Paul, if you would like to say anything additional, please feel free.
About the digital publication. Well, it was interesting because I was interviewed remotely in my studio in Cumbria, talking about works that I was making at the time. And then later we did a session in Cummington, I believe. So it was a very interesting experience. And then of course you realized that when you talk about things, it's very different than actually writing them down. So when the transcript came back, whilst it might have made a lot of sense as a spoken word, I felt it left a lot to be desired as the written word. And so I did quite a lot of editing to make the dialogue flow as a read through. But I think it's a great compliment. It's a great, it goes with the exhibition really well. So I really enjoyed the process.
And I'm going to go back just a minute here and also show Beth's. If we cooperate here, there we go. And then here is Beth's digital project. She showed you a clip of that, but there's even more on the website. So I invite you to take a look at that. And then the video, the film in its entirety is on view here. So something to enjoy a little later. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point and ask Beth and Paul a few questions here, and then we will open it up to questions coming from the audience or thoughts. So I had already actually began working with both Beth and Paul on projects and acquisitions. And after the museum committed to the Raid the Icebox project, both of their work just seemed to fit under that umbrella so very well. And I think allowed us to take their projects further in terms of another dimension by being under the Raid the Icebox umbrella. And I'd like to ask them both, how did the inclusion of the Raid the Icebox project impact your original exhibition thoughts and concepts and perceptions as your planning progressed?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. Well, I guess at first I was just so thrilled to be to do something in Pendleton House because I've always really loved period rooms, and I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to do interventions in each of the rooms or do, how I was going to interact. But ultimately, I wanted to do something immersive. I wanted to create something where people could actually walk in, and that was really a step forward for my process because I had been making large-scale installations, but typically on one wall. So this was a chance to do something I'd really been wanting to do for a long time and to really take a deep dive. And then the digital publication came up, and I remember asking, what's a digital publication? And Jeremy from the museum said, well, it's whatever you want it to be. So I thought, wow, that's incredible. So I said, well, what I'd really like is to do a fake tour of the fake period room that I'm creating in the fake home of Charles Pendleton. And the team at the museum were totally game. So it became a whole other project that I wasn't even envisioning. It added, you know, what was a 2-year project became almost like a 2.5-year project, but so worth it.
Yeah, well, for me, it was the link with Warhol that was so wonderful, because I've long been a great fan of Andy Warhol and the way that he popularized industrial print processes and pop art and moved them into the field of fine art. And it was, for me, it was an excuse to further dig into Warhol's practices. I was teaching at the time in part-time in Oslo, when at the same time as juggling Raid the Icebox and New American Scenery. And I remember going to see the Warhol, the Edvard Munch Museum in Oslo, and I picked up this catalogue, which is Munch by Warhol. And I was really amazed to see a body of work where Andy Warhol had reimagined and remade Edvard Munch's paintings as screen prints. I think that the work's not so well known as it should be, really. But anyway, so that's really what inspired the wood and Warhol platter. Was it was Warhol by Scott. But I was, it's very interesting the way his images move. The images move between media and between and gain different meanings, and it all became part of the theme of what I was doing. Yeah.
Well, as a curator at an art museum, the opportunity to shine a light on historical collections, especially those that don't typically get much attention, is just a great opportunity. And what better way to do that than with contemporary artists? So from your standpoint, your perspective, what draws you as an artist to historical work, or in this case, an entire historical collection that's in the museum? Why are you as an artist drawn to that?
Well, I think that the thing is that what makes us today is the consumption of material that has been produced in the past. And one of the things that I learned, one of the things that was a big journey for me in doing New American Scenery and Raid the Icebox, was that I came to transferware and American transferware, really looking at about transferware and landscape. And of course, I know that landscape's a political thing, and that all landscapes are sort of most landscapes that are depicted are man-made constructions. But what I hadn't prepared myself for was the extent to which the landscapes that appear and the scenes that appear on transferwares were fabricated, were concocted from a particular historical perspective. And until you start digging into history and the context of production, then you don't understand how things appear today. And I think for me, it's really interesting to be able to dig into archives and to research the stories that led to the creation of the images or the objects, because they tell you so much about the object or the image themselves, and actually that none of them are neutral. I think we sometimes think that these pictures are just as things were, but they're loaded. They're always loaded by the people who commissioned them or the people who made them.
So I think for me, the lure of history, and especially the decorative arts, is the familiarity and the fact that they make people comfortable. People know what they're looking at when they see a period room or when they see wallpaper, and they don't expect their mind to be too disturbed when they do it. And so in a way, it's a perfect vehicle for me, because I can essentially lure people in and then I can address some issues that are more contemporary and cause people to question some established narratives. And I think that was the appeal of the Pendleton House project and the link to Warhol, the way he recontextualized the museum. I think, you know, when Elizabeth told me a little bit about Pendleton, and there is only a little bit about him that we know, and he seemed such a strange mix of conflicting information, I found my link. I really found the other story, the other narrative that I wanted to tell.
I'm going to ask you one question here, and then we will open it up to the audience to ask questions. How will this experience factor into future work? And I'd also like to invite you to share, as both of you have future work that is related in various ways to this project, but how will the Braid the Icebox Now experience factor into your work?
Go ahead.
How will it factor in? Well, it was such a rich experience, and it altered the whole way that I looked at transferwares. But the research that followed from my initial investigation has altered the whole way that I looked at the transferwares, and so that has a fundamental effect on the direction I go in next. First of all, you know, the immediately, I've made another iteration of this exhibition, which is in the Bowes Museum in the north of England, in a beautiful museum, which is like a French chateau dropped in a northern English countryside. And in this case, I've actually inserted my transferware alongside the porcelain figurines, not replacing them, but putting them alongside the porcelain figurines, which is a beautiful juxtaposition. And going forwards, I'm working now with the Albany Institute of History and Art on a new iteration for New American Scenery after it leaves RISD. And in their case, we're going to work and juxtapose the artworks, the New American Scenery artworks, with paintings and drawings and transferwares from the Albany collection, which is very much about the Hudson River School, painting school. So it'll be a completely different way. But the RISD experience was so immensely positive and rich that it's affected the whole way I work, I would say.
So for me, the many objects from the show currently are going to a show at the Cheekwood Museum in Nashville, and they have a 30 or 38 room, I think, mansion that is turned into a museum. So I'm taking over the dining room and the adjacent morning room, and I'm repurposing a lot of the objects and also creating quite a few new elements for that setting. So I'm also creating a dessert table, a play on the 18th century dessert table that is actually, for inspiration, I took one of the silver pieces that Elizabeth, a show that Elizabeth curated, the wonderful Gorham show that Elizabeth created. So there's this incredible figurine who is got, you know, has this incredible pose, and she's got garlands of flowers and everything. So that's going to be Marilyn Monroe, as you can imagine. I have no idea how it's going to stand up on top of this pile of other objects in the middle of this dining table, but it will. And then after that, I have an installation in Limoges. Actually, that is opening later this month. I can't keep track. Anyway, it's opening in June 17th in Limoges, the Bernardeau Foundation. I did a 16-foot wall installation that is sort of a three-dimensional wallpaper piece about how we've sort of polluted our version of paradise and nature. But the biggest takeaway for me about the experience at RISD Museum was just this thrilling and also terrifying opportunity to work, to extend my ideas into another medium, and to work in film, and to work in this website, and it just go much deeper into the narratives that I have used in my work all along. It just gave me a lot of just excitement about moving forward and working in different materials. So it's amazing opportunity. So thank you, Elizabeth, for that.
My pleasure. I enjoyed working with you both so much. So I think now we are going to open it to the audience, and I think Sarah's going to help us with that.
Great, thank you all. I was hoping actually, Elizabeth, that I could pose your own question back to you and get a sense of how this exhibition project perhaps might change your approach to working with collections.
Oh, wow. Well, to invite 8 artists into the museum and kind of say, do what you want, is not a typical experience for curators. It was a little daunting for us as well, but it was a great experience. And the coming together of everyone to do that. I mean, as you can imagine, every single person in the museum was involved in this project or projects. And it was very refreshing. I think I will speak just for myself from a curatorial standpoint, to just let go of, if you will, the responsibility of the curation, and to have somebody else, in a sense, curate within your own collection. And I found that very refreshing and eye-opening. RISD has for a long time, the museum looked upon themselves as the artist museum. And this was a project that manifested those words in physical realities. And I think that it has not only changed the curators, but really changed the museum, or is helping to change the museum in bringing the artist's voice into the museum, into the projects, even more strongly than it was present before. And I imagine that will continue, and we're all very excited about it.
Wonderful. We do have a couple technical questions actually for Paul, but just a reminder to text your questions through the chat function. And so, Paul, we had somebody wondering about the uranium series, and if you could speak to the process. Where was the uranium glass acquired? How was it incorporated?
And the plate, where did the plate come from? It's from the 1820s.
Yeah. So I acquire things I acquire most of my stuff through eBay, auctions, or antique shops. And in this case, I think probably the plate and the uranium glass probably came off eBay. The plate's a pearlware shell-edge platter from about 1820, and I've been buying them up over the last 7 or 8 years to create enough canvases to work on, if you like. The uranium was bought on eBay. Uranium glass was bought on eBay. Uranium was used to color glass for many years. It was used in ceramics as a coloring pigment. You can still buy, is it Fiesta ware or something, with uranium glazes. Anyway, so uranium glass tends to be sort of pale green or yellow, and it illuminates when you use UV light on it. And I basically smashed up some bits of uranium glass and put them on the platter and melted them in the kiln when I fired the prints into the glaze. It uses minute amounts of uranium, and I'm told that they are perfectly safe to use, but it's a bit like luminous watch dials, I think. There are things that were used in the past which you wouldn't use today, but they're freely available on eBay. Some pretty dreadful things as well. Some pretty dreadful little objects of cast glass, which I found very distasteful, to do with Native Americans or American Indians, but I won't go into that. No. Okay.
There was also a question about your use of kintsugi, which you talked about briefly in reference to the Castle Battery series. Could you just go into a little bit more detail about that process?
Yeah, okay. So kintsugi is a Japanese process whereby broken ceramics are mended with beautiful craftsmanship, craft skills, creating, bringing attention to the break, bringing attention to the line or the joins of the broken object. And in Japanese culture, kintsugi's object is worth much more than the original. In certain cultures, as objects get older, they become more and more valuable. In Western culture, old objects, we tend to throw things, things are thrown away and old things are not viewed. It's not entirely true because antiques obviously exist, but broken objects are usually less valued in Western culture. And anyway, kintsugi is a way of accentuating the break or the crack or the line and bringing attention to it with gold. And in Japan, traditional kintsugi is a highly skilled craft. I mean, my versions are a poor imitation, I think, but I wouldn't claim to be a kintsugi craft person.
And Beth, could you tell us a little bit about your background there? Where are you and what is surrounding you at the moment?
Oh, so I'm in my studio in Brooklyn, and I have hundreds and hundreds of molds, plaster molds that I use to slip cast my work. And it's kind of a library for me. I collect a lot of plastic figurines from the flea market, or, sometimes just find them on the street, and they become like a cast of characters in my work. So I reuse them in all sorts of different contexts. It's my sort of vocabulary.
And I realize we are past 1 o'clock, but we did have one last question for Paul. Paul, could you speak to the difference between installing new American scenery in the US versus the UK?
Yeah, there are differences between the two, partly because I think in the United States, I'm a visitor who's responded to the country and the events happening within the country. And in a way, I needed to intellectually to sort of work out why it was okay for me to do that. And of course, when I sort of researched it, I found it, it's quite common, but artists have been visiting places, making pictures, and they've been accepted within the mainstream. For example, within transferwares, lots of the early transferwares which depicted American scenery were actually originally painted by a Russian visiting America. And you have people who visited America and who settled in America, artists like Claire Layton, who became an American citizen eventually. And so I sort of felt like I had to sort of, first of all, get the intellectual framework there. And also, of course, I'm sort of I'm recreating English transferwares that were imported into America that came from Staffordshire. So I've just sort of updated for the 21st century. In England, in Britain, when I'm creating new American scenery, there is a different story to tell. And that story is about the importance of that, is the fact that Staffordshire potters exported all this material across the Atlantic, which became part of Americana, became part of American culture. In a way, it's a bit more of a different kind of educational journey, because British viewers are unaware of that, basically unaware of that. The first dark blue American transferwares I saw were in America. None of them, there are hardly any in collections in Britain, because they were all exported. So it's like a slightly different story to tell. But of course, we're in the 21st century, and America is on our news screens every day. So the issues and the landscapes and the subject matters are very familiar to British viewers. There's no work to be done there,
Beth, you are getting many accolades for the film. I suppose that shared with RISD, but there was a question about the screenwriting, and was that something that you did and was new to you as well, in addition to filmmaking?
I'm sorry, the question was
The screenwriting process.
Oh, okay. Well, it was really a collaboration. And so the actors, well, Carolyn Gennari is the director of the film. And she suggested that instead of writing a script, we let the actors workshop in the beginning and really improv to develop their characters, which they did. And so I give a lot of credit to Casey and Jed for that. And then I wrote part of it, and mostly about the history of the room. And, it was definitely a joint effort in that regard, co-wrote with everyone.
Yeah. There was also a question about the incorporation of mirrors in the game of chance room.
Right. So, well, the one thing is that it's a very narrow room. It's like a little jewel box when you walk into it. And so having the mirrors in the center kind of gives you this very immersive feeling, like you're in this whole other world. And when you go in the center, there's actually a little infinity mirror experience, very popular for selfies, by the way. So it's part of the whole idea of reflecting on the idea of image versus reality.
Sense. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. Unless you have anything else, Leslie?
Well, I just want to thank everyone and thank a couple of people along the way that have really been supportive of this project, which began in 2012 when I shared a plate image with Paul, or he shared it with me, and it was the hairpin turn in North Adams on Route 2, and that led to so many things, including funding from Alturas Foundation that supported the New American Scenery, research and the expansion of the work into larger formats and new technologies. So huge thanks to all those who helped fund the writing, the research, the production, and acquire new works, because that's how the next ones get made. So if your questions weren't answered, we're going to try to compose a very nice follow-up. And Sarah, did you have anything more to add?
Nope. We can field your questions and send them along to our panel. And yeah, expect to hear from us in the next couple of days with recording, etc. And we hope to see you all again for another Ferrin Contemporary virtual conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.